Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into Justin Quack's really fascinating text, The Gospel of the Kingdom. We're going to unpack his core argument, which is pretty bold, that the biblical narrative actually prioritizes God's organic, living kingdom way over human-led institutions. It's a striking analysis, honestly. It takes us all the way from ancient desert encampments right up to modern-day administrative budgets. So if you've ever wondered about the original design behind these ancient texts and how they translate, or, maybe failed to translate today, you are absolutely in the right place. To really grasp this massive shift, we're going to trace a chronological journey. We'll start with rejecting the divine king, look at the price of human rule, talk about restoring the original plan, compare the kingdom versus the church, and finally, outline the actual traits of the kingdom. All right, let's jump right into section 1, rejecting the divine king and the demand for a human leader. So, the inciting incident here in ancient history is an entire nation demanding a human king. And the author points out a deep, almost tragic irony here. On one hand, you have God's leadership, which featured literal reality-bending miracles. Parting the Red Sea, providing miraculous manna every single day for food, and leading them through the wilderness with a pillar of cloud by day and fire by night. Their clothes didn't even wear out. But on the other hand, what did the people actually ask for? Human leadership. They just wanted to blend in, to be exactly like all the other nations around them, and to have a regular human being fight their battles. Quake actually describes this as a desire for vicarious living. Basically, they just wanted someone else to live their lives for them. This crucial turning point is summed up perfectly in this quote from the text. So, the elders of Israel had gathered together because, they were totally fed up. The prophet Samuel was getting older, and he had appointed his sons Joel and Abijah as judges. The problem? His sons were completely corrupt. They enriched themselves, they perverted justice, the whole shebang. The people used this as their catalyst to demand a human king. But listen to God's response to Samuel, which really clarifies the true nature of this demand. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king. Basically, they were trying to solve a spiritual and leadership problem using human wisdom, and in doing so, they completely abandoned their role as a model nation. Moving on to section 2. The price of human rule and the real cost of the system. God actually instructed Samuel to solemnly warn the people about how the system really works in practice. Because if you want a human kingdom, it comes with a massive price tag. And a king isn't necessarily being needlessly cruel here. It's just the raw, literal cost of maintaining a human institution. The text lays out this cost clearly. You're conscripting your sons to run in front of chariots and build weapons of war. You're pressing your daughters into service as cooks and bakers. The system takes the absolute best of your fields and vineyards, imposes a 10% tithe on your grain and flocks just to feed its officials, and ultimately ends up treating the people as slaves. So, you want the system? You're going to pay for it with your family, your crops, and your freedom. But despite those incredibly severe warnings, the people insisted. They shouted, "No, we want a king over us." And that fateful choice triggered a rapid, terrifying spiritual and national decline. Think about it. It took only 3 generations of kings, just Saul, David, and Solomon. After that, the unified kingdom completely fractured into Israel in the north and Judah in the south. And the spiritual leadership going forward? It was largely dismal. Quag points out that out of 20 northern kings, all of them were deemed evil by the text. By 720 BC, the Assyrians had completely conquered and scattered the northern kingdom of Israel. Then, about 100 years later, Judah fell into Babylonian captivity. So this overwhelming desire for a human king, it ended in absolute devastation and the complete scattering of the nation. Which brings us to section 3, restoring the original plan and why Jesus was no plan B. Now, the author argues a point here that really reshapes how we might view the entire New Testament. He stresses that Jesus was not a plan B. He wasn't some afterthought hastily scrambled together just because Israel failed. When John the Baptist and Jesus showed up preaching that the kingdom of God was near, that was actually the resumption of the original plan God had all along. Quack emphasizes that under the old covenant of the law, humanity could just never be good enough in their own strength. It literally took Jesus delivering a death blow to the penalty of sin to make it possible for God's kingdom to finally be established right in the midst of humanity. It wasn't just about saving individual sinners for the afterlife, it was about bringing the kingdom to earth. To really drive this home, consider this stark pattern interrupt from the text. In the book of Matthew alone, Jesus emphasizes the word kingdom over 50 times. 50. But by contrast, he only mentions the word church twice. 50 to 2. The source asks a really vital question here. If Jesus' absolute main mission was preaching the coming of God's kingdom, why on earth is there so much emphasis on the word church in modern Christianity? That huge contrast leads us right into section 4, kingdom versus church, and a look at modern institutions. That massive shift in language ties directly into a super grounding anecdote from the author. He tells this story about a pastor friend who was talking with his accountant. Now, this was a secular accountant, not a believer, and he had just finished doing the church's books. The accountant looks at the pastor and says, "You are in deep trouble." Why? Well, he pointed out that any regular, healthy business spends the bulk of its finances on its core business. But looking at this church's books, the accountant saw that the vast majority of the finances were simply being spent on non-core business. Just keeping the machine running. Rental costs, staff salaries, internal maintenance, rather than actual outward-facing ministry to the community. And that secular accountant's rebuke really reveals a staggering reality. When you look at how much of the budget goes strictly to maintenance, the author argues that this is actually an exact echo of the ancient Israelites paying for the system of a human king. The modern institution often just becomes a mechanism where members pay their money simply to keep the lights on, to maintain all that local church busyness. It stops acting as a transformative force directed at those outside the walls. Quack strongly suggests that this is exactly why the modern church is losing its impact. It's prioritizing institutional survival over the actual kingdom. Let's unpack what it actually means to flip that script in section 5, traits of the kingdom and living the paradigm. So, if the goal is the kingdom and not just an institution, what are the actual characteristics of this paradigm? Well, Quack lays out a core framework with 4 main traits. First up is lordship. The kingdom is wherever the king has dominion. It requires active obedience and true followership to a benevolent king, not just passive agreement. Second is entry. You enter this kingdom by becoming a disciple through belief and the redemptive work of Jesus. It's not just a human administrative decision. Third, and this is huge, timeline. The kingdom isn't just some far-off future event waiting for Jesus to physically return. It is here and now, dwelling actively within the believer. And finally, scope. It's meant to have an expanding, totally organic impact on the whole world. The kingdom isn't some rigid set of doctrines you just sign your name to. It's an active, living, organic paradigm that has to be evidenced by action and fruit. Okay, so what is that action actually supposed to look like? Jesus taught that the kingdom of God is like salt, light, and yeast, meaning it's supposed to organically change literally everything it touches. The author points out a really sharp contrast here using a fascinating anecdote about former New Zealand Prime Minister Helen Clark. Back in 2005, she was asked what she did to attract the Christian vote. Her reply? Nothing. They vote the same as anyone else in New Zealand. Quack views this as a profound, stinging rebuke. Because if believers are just blending in, voting, and acting exactly like the rest of society, well, they're like salt that has completely lost its flavor. True kingdom impact means you are acting as an undeniable, visible catalyst in society. As we wrap up this explainer, the author's analysis leaves us with a highly provocative challenge. We really have to ask ourselves, are we just demanding a human king all over again? Or are modern systems, with all their heavy maintenance costs and inward focus, simply a repeat of ancient Israel's desire to just have someone else fight their battles and live their lives for them? Or are we truly operating with a kingdom mindset? Are we acting organically as salt and light to actually transform the world around us? It's a massive paradigm shift for sure, and it demands that we take a very hard, honest look at what we are actually building.